In this video, I'm going to show you how to complete the square. We do use completing the square to solve quadratic equations, especially if they can't be factored. We're not going to do that in this video. That will be in the next video when I show you how this is used to solve quadratic equations. But for this video, I'm just going to show you the method for completing the square. What we want to end up with when we complete the square is a binomial squared. And when we end up with that, it will be easy to use that to solve a quadratic. If we look at this, remember when you square a binomial, that's the same as x plus a times x plus a. And if you FOIL that, or remember the formula, that will give you x squared plus 2ax plus a squared. The thing is, when you start to solve the quadratic, or when you start to complete the square, you don't know what this a squared is. You will have the x squared, and you will have a number. 2a is represented as one number. And you have to figure out what to add so that it will be in this form, which is a perfect square. To do that, what do we have to do to figure out what a is? Well, the number in front of the x is 2 times a. So the first thing you would do is divide that number by 2. When you divide that by 2, that's going to give you a number which is the same as a. 2a divided by 2 is a. We then square that number, and that tells us what we're going to add in that place. Now, when working with a quadratic, you can add that to one side. Usually we put it on the left. And then if you add it to the other side, the equation is still the same. It's just that we added the same thing to both sides. And you found out earlier in algebra that if you add the same number to both sides of an equation, it is still a true statement. So let's look at our first example, and I'll show you how this works. We're going to start with z squared minus 10z, and it's up to us to figure out what we have to add here. Remember what I just showed you. You're going to take the number that's in front of the z, which is 10. If you want to carry the sign with it, that's fine. Half of negative 10 would be negative 5. But when you square it, it's going to be positive anyway. Whether it's a positive or a negative, when you square it, you're going to end up with a plus sign. So we really don't have to worry about the negative at this time. Half of 10 is 5. And when you square that, you get 25. So we are going to add 25. Now, when we're solving an equation, we would add 25 here, and on the other side of the equal sign, we would also add 25. For today, this is what we're going to look at. Now, because I remember the formula, or I remember what we did when we squared a binomial, this gives me z. Always use that sign. That sign's going to come down because that's always going to be a plus. We're always going to be adding the number. That's going to be minus 5 squared. Real quickly, if you don't understand what we did, if you take z minus 5 times z minus 5 and FOIL that, you're going to get z squared minus 5z minus 5z plus 25. The minus 5z's combined to give me the minus 10z. So I added the 25. When we're solving quadratics, you'll just add that to both sides. Because I know you learn somewhere in your algebra, whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. For today, though, we're just going to look at what we would do with one side. We're not going to work with equations yet. Let's look at this one. We have r squared plus 20r half of 20 is 10. Square it, 10 times 10, you get 100. Now, what does this become? This is the same as r, use that sign, plus 10 squared. The number that goes there is always what you had before you squared it. What if we have a squared minus 7a? Don't let it confuse you that that's not an even number and you can't divide it by 2. Yes, you can. 7 divided by 2 is 7/2, 7/2. Don't change that to a decimal. Then you have 3.5, and you have to square 3.5. What does that give you? Most of you probably will have difficulty with that unless you pull out your calculator. But this is easy to do. You don't have to pull out your calculator. I already told you half of that is 7/2. What do you get when you square it? You get 49/4. What does this become? You already know what this becomes. It becomes a, bring down the sign, minus, and what did you have before you squared it? You had 7/2. Many times what you have on the other side is already a fraction anyway. And often the problems they give you, the denominators are not going to be difficult to work with. So don't change them to decimals. We know how to work with fractions. Okay, let's try another one. N squared minus 1/2 n. I can already put the plus there because remember we're squaring what we end up with, and when we square it, it's always going to be positive. We're not working with imaginary numbers, and the only way you can square a number and get a negative is if it's imaginary. Okay, you got a fraction here. What's half of that? Well, it's 1/4. Don't tell me it's 1. If you have half a candy bar and you split one piece in half, You don't have a whole candy bar in this hand, you have a fourth of a candy bar. Or think of a pizza. If you cut it in half and you cut one of those pieces in half, you have a fourth of a pizza. Okay, now we have to square that. When you square a fraction, you square the top and you square the bottom. You know what 1 squared is, that's 1. And I know you know what 4 squared is. That's 16. So what's that look like after we do that? We end up with n, use that sign, minus 1/4 squared. Now, why couldn't we just put the 1/4 here and been done with it? Because you have to know what you're adding to this side so you know what you're going to add to the other side. So don't try to cut corners, okay? You're doing this for a reason. When you add it here, you're also going to add it to the other side. And that ends our lesson on how to complete a square. The next video will be a little bit longer than this one, but we will have examples of how to use completing the square to solve quadratics. I know you're not going to want to miss that one.